The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. So, Lennox, welcome to the journey. And this is Lennox Barnett, and Lennox and I have known each other for I don't even know how long, very, very long time.
Quite a while.
Yeah, quite a long time with my niece and nephew going to Rockford Christian, and then later when Caleb and Sarah were at Rockford Christian. So, and I appreciate the impact you've had on their lives. But let me share just a little bit about the journey is an opportunity for individuals to come on and tell their story of maybe they've had some kind of setbacks in their life, maybe some kind of struggle in their life, some opportunity to have to fail forward, that the obstacles that in their life actually were the opportunities for growth. And other times it may be where someone has transformed their life, changed their stars from what maybe originally looked like they were dealt to what was waiting for them beyond. And so Lennox, welcome to the journey. I'm looking forward to hearing what's going on with you now and where you're at. I know quite a bit about your story, but just for the people who are listening right now, tell us a little bit. What do you do for fun? What does Lennox do for fun?
Thank you, Kevin. It's quite an honor to be here with you and to just the opportunity to share that story. I always take advantage of that. So thank you. Oh man, what do I do for fun? There's so many different things that I'm trying to think about. One of the things I love to do is I'm a musician, so singing is probably one of my primary ways to kind of enjoy what I do. I love water sports, so I like to get out there and wakeboard a little bit. I like boating, I like jet skiing, and and I love seeing the world.
Okay.
Love that.
Sure. Okay. And you are married to a beautiful lady, Allie, and you have two just beautiful girls.
Yep.
And so you and Allie have been married for how long?
So Allie and I have been married for about 8 years now. So it was 8 years in June of this year.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And then two little girls. Let's tell us a little bit about them.
Yep. Got two little girls. Thank you. Yeah, they are really beautiful. I'll say so myself.
Yeah.
I'm credit to my wife. But Ashlyn is going to be turning 5 here in December, which is hard to believe. Elliot is almost 2, so she'll turn 2 here on October 5th.
Okay.
And she was our miracle baby. She was born at about 32 weeks and was spent some time in the NICU. But you look at her, she's small, so you can tell she's small, but other than that, she just is doing wonderful, doing great. So,
sure. Well, good deal. I know that was a scary time for you guys during that time period, and as well as there was a lot of different things that were going on in your guys' personal life, and Allie is involved with helping youth, so she's working full time as well as working with taking care of the girls, and you obviously are going to get into your story about all the different things that you're doing, but well, why don't we start there? Why don't we go ahead and just kind of jump into it? You're not from the United States. You were actually born in Jamaica. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? A little bit of just kind of an overall summary of where you were born, what was going on, and a little bit about that part of the story.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So it's the question always comes up. It's like, how did you get here?
Sure.
So you were born in Jamaica, and yes, this is true. It started out, with me being born in Jamaica, born blind. Actually, my mom contracted German measles while she was hospitalized on bed rest when she was about 6 months pregnant with me because of she was actually diagnosed with hypertension. I would say probably 3 years before I was born or conceived, and so as a result of that, she had high blood pressure. The pregnancy was high risk. Got admitted. They put her next to somebody who had German measles, and out of that, I was born blind, born with congenital glaucoma. When I was born, my grandma, that morning when they found out that I was born with glaucoma, decided that, God started a good work from day one and kept me alive thus far, with all the stuff that my mom was going through medically. And the doctors didn't even find out that my mom had the measles, because back then they probably would have taken the baby. And so she says, I'm going to just pray that God would finish what he started. So she prayed, and within about in 8 short years, which seemed like it was forever, but my eyes were open. God just miraculously healed my eyes. I was born with congenital glaucoma. There's no cure for glaucoma with all the modern advances in medicine to this very day.
Okay.
And so to be able to see after being born blind is a complete miracle.
And you were about how many months did they notice that you started having sight?
So I was 8 years old.
8 years old.
So I can remember being blind.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so after having received, getting my sight back, getting healed, my mom was always, I would say, about at least once or twice a year, she'd be admitted in the hospital. And finally, unfortunately, she passed away when I was just before my 14th birthday.
Okay.
I lived in a very poor part of the country. I was in Kingston, but in kind of the ghettos of Kingston. And my mom was always in the hospital, though she worked at the hospital. She was more of a patient than a caregiver, and so means and ends and all of that were pretty tight. My father was a father of 23 children on the island, and my mom only had 3 boys, and they were all his, but he was busy multiplying and being fruitful, and so they weren't together, and that also created a bit of a strain. I didn't know who he was. I knew who he was, but didn't have a relationship with him, for lack of a way to explain that. So that was going on all the while growing up, and then my mom suddenly passed away, and my grandma was just had retired and wasn't able to take care of me with the pension that she was on. So then they decided that I would become a ward of the state. But beautiful part of the journey was, after receiving my sight, I was able to see a little bit. So the doctors thought, well, it would be best for me to actually go to a school where I would learn how to read Braille and how to be a highly effective, I would say visually impaired young man. And so the Salvation Army School for the Blind was in Kingston, one of the only blind schools in the Caribbean, and I was sent to that. I enrolled there as a young boy and learned to read Braille. But after my mom died, they had an orphanage that was attached to the School for the Blind, so I just enrolled in that as well. Okay. After being there about a year into it, a group came down on a mission trip, and they met me and they said, hey, we love you so much, we just want to take you back to the U.S. with us. And miraculously, that paperwork that was supposed to take 18 months came through in a matter of hours. And I was back in the United States actually entered the United States for the first time, here in Rockford, Illinois, of all places. Went to Rockford Christian Schools, and in the meantime, lived with this family. And then after just about my senior year, they decided to take a different direction in where their lives were headed. And so they asked me to either find someplace else to live or go back to Jamaica. And it was at that point where a few families, especially the Nyquist, decided to take me in as part of theirs. And I was able to continue to live here. Worked at Rockford Christian, but then this church called Heartland Community Church started, and I was able to jump on board, be a part of that starting, and met my wife there, and served there for about 15 years.
Okay.
But in the midst of serving there, we're talking about journey, and we're talking about story. Yeah. I have this extensive story of miracles and of setbacks darkness.
Yeah.
And literally falling upwards and trying to figure out, well, what does this all mean, and who am I, and what do I have to contribute to society? And
let me just before we jump into that, I'm gonna go back to when you were younger, right? And I want to ask a little bit about that. And the part of the reason why I want to do that is because I don't want to lose that piece, right? And because we talk a lot of times when you like the people that have been visually, had their eyesight their whole life, we just don't know what it's like to be either visually impaired or to be blind, right? And then we hear someone who goes from blind to being able to see. We just put it like almost like as if it was a story that was told long ago, and we're not necessarily or at Christmas time or something like that, right? So I want to ask you a little bit more about, like, you were 8 years old. Prior to 8 years old, you could see nothing at all?
Yes, nothing at all.
No shapes, no...
Yeah, no shapes, no color, no lights, just darkness.
So what was that like? For trying to remember, I mean, because it wasn't like you knew what it was like to see, and then you didn't see, this had been your normal. And so what from what you remember, and again, you were pre 8 years old, but from what you do remember of that, what was that like? How do you recall? And your mom was alive, but she was sick, and was it just you and your mom at that time?
So when my brothers were around, they were both at home, and normally in the Caribbean and in third world countries, like a family would say, for example, you have a lot. Where that your house is built on, like you have land. What you tend to do is leave space for your kids to come and build on that land or have. So my grandma, when she bought the land in Kintyre, which is in this kind of a, I wouldn't say remote, but a rural village area. She bought enough land that my mom could move on it, and my other aunt could move on it. And so we had this space, and my brothers, they didn't really leave home yet. Up top of where our house was, my brother was living just behind us, and my grandma was right next to us. I mean, you could step from one roof to the next. That's how close we were with each other. So my brothers were there. My mom was around, and my grandma. And the cool thing is that when I was diagnosed with glaucoma, my grandma believed that God, who started a good work, would complete what He started. So she says, I'm going to pray about it. The morning, actually, when my grandma was the one who found out that my mom had the measles. She came into the hospital to visit, and when she saw my mom with this rash, she says, "Hey, I need to figure out why you have this rash." So she goes and she asks the nurse, "What is the lady in next to my daughter for?" And the nurse says, "Oh, she has the measles." And my grandma knew right away, if the doctors found out that my mom had contracted the measles, they would actually terminate the pregnancy because of the birth defects that would come following, the birth because of me being,
being devolved.
Exactly. And so, with that said, my grandma then went home and started praying and started this prayer chain and this prayer meeting that meant every single Saturday night. So much so that they started a church in our front yard. There was so much that they planted a church. They built a church. So there's two houses. Well, three, one up back, and then a church in the front yard. So saying all of that to your question, being blind, I mean, it's hard to describe what's it like. It's just complete darkness, like and I didn't know that because I was born that way. It was just normal for me. It was funny though that I would say, I would hear, "Well, you got a new shirt today," and that was very rare. But when I would hear that, I get so excited, and I'd say, "Yeah, what color is it?" And they'd say, "Oh, it's red." I say, "Oh my, that's nice." But I had no concept of red. And when somebody said, "Oh, and this is happening," and they would describe it to me, I couldn't. It's hard to distinguish, but I couldn't like see shapes or color or shades, but I could sense it on the inside. Like somebody would say, "Oh, it looks like this," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." Like I could just sense it. It was so interesting.
Sure.
I mean, I could smell anything, I could hear anything.
Yeah, and they talk about this idea that if one of your senses is not accessible, right, that your other senses are amplified.
Exactly.
And so now thinking back about that, because I think of like when we dream, right? And so there's visuals when we dream. But in your particular case, when you dreamt when you were 6 years old, was it again? What was the sensation?
So it was very sensory. So like you could just like sense that person. So like voices, sounds, and smells is what you kind of. And it's weird to dream about smells.
Yeah.
But you do. You just know. And like say for example, I never had a concept of what a place looked like, but I knew how I felt when I was there.
Yeah.
I knew how I felt when I was at my house. I knew and one of the funny things is when you are blind and you're taken out of an environment that you're used to, you're totally dependent on a person. So you associate being in a place where you are, where you're not familiar with being there with that person. If you are there by yourself and you don't know, there's a different sensation there. It's a kind of a sensation of what's happening. I don't know where I'm at. I don't know, and I know that feeling. So when you dream, say for example, sometimes you have dreams where you're at a place that's not familiar, but you're seeing things. For me, I wouldn't see things, but I'd sense that it would be kind of a, whoa, this is strange. I'm a little vulnerable. I'm very vulnerable because I don't know where I'm at. I'm going to run into something, or it was more of a fearful, like I'm out of place, and there's nobody here who I can associate with that brought me here, or I can lean on. So it's an interesting deal, but I didn't know any different.
Right.
That was a way of life for me.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of seeing somebody, I would sense them. I could touch anything and kind of figure out exactly what it is, and I would remember the shape right away. So even in my dreams, I would remember the shapes of things, and it would be a thing.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that's probably the best description that I've ever heard about that. And so now you go through this process, right? Grandma's praying. All these individuals are praying for God's work to be completed within you, and specifically, right? They were praying intentionally about that your sight would be restored.
Yes.
And so this starts. Was it like all of a sudden you could see, or did it like come over a period of time?
Okay, so yeah, it was both ends. So it was like I was at nothing, and then what had happened was the doctors had done a procedure to kind of just relieve pressure, just relieve fluid from my eyes.
Because that's part of what the glaucoma is. There's pressure.
Yes. Yep. Increased pressure behind the optic nerve, so they had to kind of release some pressure, and so they would poke some holes. Now they do it with lasers, but back then they just literally poke some holes to kind of drain off pressure. That doesn't do anything to make you see, and they explain glaucoma like this: that the optic nerve is like a mirror that when light's reflected on it, you can see. So if you erase the reflective part of the mirror, like just scrape it off, there's nothing, and there's nothing they can do to replace that.
Gotcha.
And so when they did this procedure, it wasn't to make me see, it was to relieve pressure and help with pain management. But all of a sudden, I'm in recovery, and they take the patches off, and I start to scream. And I remember I don't think a migraine hurt that bad. It was just like a tremendous kind of a earthquake going on in your head. And what was happening as I'm older now and I can kind of reflect, what was happening is my brain was trying to go, what in the world is going on? And my eyes were going, what in the world? And they were both not, they never talked to each other before, right? My brain would tell my hands to look.
Yeah.
My brain would tell my nose to look. My brain would tell my ears to look, you know? And so right now, my brain's kind of going, what do you do? And my eyes going, what are you telling me to do? And so, after they figured out that I started to see, it was first light, and then it gradually, you know, I started seeing, you know, obviously objects and shapes and all that, but had no concept of what those things were. I remembered having to learn how to even open a door. Normally,
which you knew how to open before
I knew,
that.
yeah. I knew how to open before that by using my hands, by stretching my hands out forward, stepping forward, and kind of moving my hands back and forth as they're stretched out, just to not trip over anything or run into anything, but to find the door. When I found the door, I would reach my hand up the door and then come down till I felt the handle. Once I felt the handle, I know I would turn or push up or down and pull towards me or push. All right? I knew those motions. But then my eyes, once they started working, they would see the door. But my brain, my eyes didn't know that was the door I'm going for. But my brain would still tell my hands, find a door. But then my eyes would start to go, but am I seeing the door? Is that the door? And my brain would go so my hands and my eyes were doing this fighting thing. My brain was trying to play referee. It was a weird thing. But then I had to learn to look at the door, look at the handle, and then tell my hands, reach, then pull, push, or lift up or lift down. So it was it was an interesting, but it took a couple of years. It took a while.
Oh, I bet. I can
to kind of reach that. Even now, if you were to hand me like a dollar bill, like really quickly, I would literally put my hand up, but I would pause first, look at it, and take it. I still have that kind of a slow reflex where I have to think about it.
Sure.
And my brain goes, all right, there it is. You see it? Okay, reach and take it.
So I know this is like a really general question, right?
Yeah.
What I would say, but is there, because this the site didn't begin the process of restoration until you were 8. So this 0 to 8 was this sense of being able, this emotional trusting and learning and sensing with what now would be your eyes closed.
Yes.
Is there, like, when you're doing some type of activity, I've watched you worship and I watched you sing numerous times, and there'll be times when your eyes are closed.
Yes.
And I imagine that you probably can wakeboard and water ski probably with your eyes closed just as good as you can or maybe better with your eyes open.
Probably. Yes.
Is there a sense that's almost like is there a comfort place there?
Yeah, there is. Yes, there is, and there is also it's both ends. So it's a sense of comfort, right? Especially when I'm fearful about something. If I can't see it, I tell myself it's not there. But then there's also a sense of like, I don't want to close my eyes because I don't want to close it and go back to it never being opened again.
Okay.
But so it's tricky. It's kind of both ends.
Okay.
But for me, even in worship, when I close my eyes, sometimes they used to say, well, when you go to pray, they say, clasp your hands or put your hands together and close your eyes. And people would say in the church, well, why did it close your? Is that a God? Did God say we should do that? And people say, no, it's just to eliminate distraction, right? And for me in worship, that is because I had a view of God that was personal. That's way different than what I have now, having sight. When I couldn't see, and I would hear my grandma sing and pray on those Saturday nights, and they would pray for me and all of that. There was just this view of God that I can't even explain. I don't think I'm gonna be able to put a finger on it again until I get to heaven. And when I lead worship and I close my eyes in those moments, I'm going after those moments, that sacred space that I used to sit in on a Saturday night and listen to my grandma sing "Sweet Hour of Prayer, Sweet Hour of Prayer," or "Draw me nearer and nearer, blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side." Just even to think about that right now, it's just like, yeah. But outside of that, when I would close my eyes, though, for other reasons, it would be about, okay, it's a safe place to kind of get away from fear itself. So
interesting. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing that, because I do a lot of meditation and spend time doing meditation, and I recognize, for me, part of me being able to go into that space, go into that God space, is being able to close my eyes, but I can still be distracted with my thoughts.
Yes.
And so it isn't just not having the visual stimulation, but when I can release those thoughts and then gently go back to that focal point, there is that space. And so I was curious, especially because the time period in your life of when that was, and I've never heard someone explain the way you did today, so thank you, about the transition, right?
Yeah.
So we think, of course, like in the movies, that's bam, all of a sudden sight's there and everything, now all of a sudden you're doing everything.
Do everything, no,
not at all. It's like, being restored to be able to walk, right? Or after a surgery or something, it takes time for your body to, and it takes a lot of work to bring the two together. So thank you very much for sharing that part of the story.
Yeah.
So to fast forward, when did singing start? When did the music start? Obviously, Grandma had a huge part in that.
Yes.
And those are some of your core sacred things you remember growing up. But when did music start for you? When did the singing start for you? When did the playing instruments? When did all that come? And what does music mean to you?
Yeah. So great question. You see, music, like I said earlier, music actually started when, from a very young age, my grandma would have these Saturday night prayer meetings. Yeah. And she would, people would gather, and my grandma was like a song leader in the church. They didn't have instruments, or maybe they had a guitar, or if they were lucky. And what they would do was they would gather, and for worship they would say, "All right, would you turn to?" There's one of two ways. If it's worship, if it's praise and worship, they go, "Sister Williams, can you raise a lively chorus?" It's funny. They would say that, "Sister Williams, can you raise a lively chorus?" Okay. She would just, and I remember, she would say, one of the ones that she would always raise is, she goes, "Can you raise a lively chorus?" She goes, "Better days are coming by and by," and people just would start singing. They knew exactly where she was going with that. Yeah. So they would, that's raising a lively chorus.
Sure.
And then they'd say, "We'll turn to hymn number 636. Sister Williams, can you raise a chorus?" And then she would just go, "Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder," and then the whole congregation would just belt it out.
Sure.
In worship. So I would hear this, even in this prayer meeting setting every Saturday night, and there's just the hymns of her faith that she would sing, and all these people who had gathered would sing out so loud, and so it would be, and of course I was blind and I was in that space like we talked about, right? Yeah. And I was just hearing these sacred words and the deep, rich theology that was coming coming out and then hearing, I mean, if you hear a Caribbean person, somebody from a third world country who has nothing but the power and the reality of the person of Jesus Christ in their life, that's their sustainer, when they sing it's something powerful happens when they lift their voices, and it's like 30 of them. So I would hear that and I'd be caught up in this, and it would be a safe place for me. It would be a place of comfort, and it would be it would be that space, a God space for me. So that was always in the back of my mind. The church started in our front yard, and of course I was musical because of my grandma, and Jamaica is known for reggae music. And so I was torn, and as I got older, it was like, if you're a Christian, you don't listen to reggae music and you don't sing it, but if you're not, that's your thing. If you love music, right? And Bob Marley used to always say, one good thing about music is when it hits you, you feel no pain. So I was just battling with that for the longest time, and never wanted to really make a decision to say, well, I stepped across the line of faith, because then that means I would put aside my love for good reggae music.
And why do you think there was such a split there? Was that fear? What was the? Or
I think it was religion.
Fear. Yeah, and what was the fear that was in the religion?
So the fear a lot of people say, well, they taking up that passage of scripture out of context where it says, you must be in the world but not of it. And of course they thought, well, reggae music is of the world. You can be in the world, but reggae music is of the world. Don't be of reggae music. But you know what I mean? And that's just one small example. That could be a whole nother discussion.
Sure, yeah.
But it's just one small example of that. And I grew up in that kind of environment, and respectfully so, I totally understood at the time. But for me, it made it difficult for me to even sing, because I was afraid to sing the reggae music in front of my grandma because of who she was. I mean, she was a God-fearing woman, and I respected her deeply and still do. And didn't want to sing the Christian songs because I didn't want to be identified as a Christian singer or a Christian. Right. So, but however, I still had that love for it, and it still continued to grow inside of me until my mom passed away. But just before my mom passed away, we had this opportunity where church was going to church summer camp, Bible camp for a week, and my mom says I was going, and I said I'm not going because we don't have the money. And long story short, the morning of the Bible camp, my mom wakes me up with my bags packed, and I was like, I'm not going because we don't have the money. And she says, oh, wait, you are. I believe God's going to provide. And lo and behold, she went out back. We had a kitchen that's was a shed in the back. So she went out to make me some tea. She comes back in, and I'd already crawled into bed. She gets me out of bed, goes back out again. A lady comes to the door and drops off an envelope. My mom comes back and she says, who was at the door? I said, a lady from the church. Just dropped an envelope off and says, God said it was, he laid it on her heart to give you this. So she opened up the envelope, and it was $500, exactly what we needed for me to go on this trip. So lo and behold, I was going. Got to the summer camp, or the Bible camp, for the week, and heard about the love of Jesus in a relevant way to where I was at the time. Yes, there was a church that was just like steps outside my front door in my yard, and they don't close the doors. They put speakers through the windows going out to the public, so you can't miss it. And so I heard the truth of the gospel, but it just wasn't tangible and relevant to where I was at. But at Bible camp, at youth camp, I heard it, and we sang Amazing Grace for the first time. I once was blind, but now I see. I remember singing those lines, but hearing my grandma always saying to me, you are a miracle, you're a miracle. And experiencing this newfound life in seeing not only physically now, but spiritually. That I was blind to the fact that, God has done exceedingly abundantly more than I could ever imagine. I can see the doctors are baffled by that. And he did that for me. and His love and His mercies has kept me and brought me through. I mean, we had a what we call a gully. It's a drainage system that ran through our yard, and it was at least 6 foot at points deep. It was and it was stones and concrete, and my family will tell the amount of times I would be walking and fall off and fall. I mean, I had numerous concussions just falling into that thing because I wouldn't, just miss my step. And God kept me, all those times. And the times I ran into things and, and stepped out into traffic. And just imagine Caribbean traffic.
Oh, yeah.
So with that said, got this wonderful opportunity to make a decision for Jesus Christ and came home. And I remembered just being able to step out of my front door, step into church, and obviously singing was a big part of church in Jamaica still to this day, and that's where it actually began for me. Sure. I was able to reconcile the truth of God's hand and His love for me and the miracles that He's performed in my life, and just the hope that I now have in Him, and the opportunity I got to walk away from the way I used to be to this new life of relationship, one-on-one relationship with my Creator. And for all that He's done for me, for where He's brought me from, and how He's continued to prove Himself more than real to me, I got to sing about it. Sure. So that's how it began.
Sure. That part where you talked about being at that church camp, and obviously you're a teenager, right? And a big part of being a teenager is trying to figure out where you fit in, right? And now you're a teenager who can see, but you're obviously loyal to grandma and loyal to your mom and loyal to the family. But then there's this other part, right? This musician part of you that's being called, right?
Yes.
And when you're at this church camp, and in that line in Amazing Grace, I was once blind and I could see. Well, that was on multiple levels. Right?
Yes.
And I think there was the physical part, right? But most of the time, in that song, we're not talking about the physical part of now having physical sight.
Yes.
We're really talking about an awakening to what may have been going on the whole time, but we were ignoring it or refusing it, and and choosing not to look there, right? And kind of like you said, before, that sometimes if I don't want to see something, I close my eyes to not see it. And I guess we can also close our hearts to things, and then focus on something else. I want to fast forward. That not only that unfolding of that, and then and the passion and being able to express that, through music, right? You're at this time period. Well, I'm probably fast forwarding here. Mom dies, right? And that then put you into, as you were mentioning earlier, that orphanage, and that ended up being the same, similar to the school, right, that you were going to when you were younger.
Yes.
And that's when some individuals were coming from a missions trip from Rockford, and that was your first exposure, or was that was the first exposure to that group of people?
Yes.
Okay. And somehow, now how does that, they bring you back to the United States, and that was still a temporary, right?
Yes.
They were serving as foster parents at that time. And then got involved with going to school here. You were a teenager here. And then and got involved with obviously the church they were attending at that time. And then as you graduated and some shifts were happening, that's when the Nyquist came into your life. And now you're part of their family. And they have 3 boys, and on all the different opportunities that they could expose you to. Right? You were a praise and worship leader for Heartland, and then had an opportunity to work at Rockford Christian, leading worship as well. And then some changes happened. You were doing that for a long time. And then some changes in the church happened, some changes in the school happened, and even though things were going well and doing really well, they were going in a different direction. And why don't you tell us a little bit about that, because that was also one one of those wasn't planned, right? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So as I grew into this opportunity here in the United States. Actually, we talked about starting to sing. When I, one of the most pivotal parts of me, I remember where music became kind of like a lighthouse for me was after my mom died, and it felt like I was blind again, like I was back in this tunnel of darkness. Jamaica is sunny, probably 360 days of the year, but I just felt dark. Felt real dark. And I remember just going back to some of those songs, because the morning my mom died, my grandma said, God will never teach you to swim to let you drown. He's been teaching you to swim this whole time. He will never teach you to swim. And that was profound, because you see, I started swimming, I started singing, I started swimming. I made it through. I got to the United States and lived with this family and went to church with them. And then after 3 years, they wanted to release their authority over me. And then the Nyquist came in and took me in as a part of their family. But as that was happening, that too was like, I didn't plan that. I didn't plan coming to the United States, falling in love with the family that brought me back. And then after 3 years having to, leave that and adjust to a new family, and then have 4 other families who said we want to do a timeshare and get some Lennox time in our family too. But it was a part of that journey, and I made it through. Like again, my grandma saying, God won't teach you to swim to let you drown. Then my time at Heartland was wonderful. 15 great years, and I was able to do a variety of different roles as I led worship, but was able to work in student ministries, not only coordinating small groups, but as a student ministry pastor of worship and programming. And then at my last couple of years, 3 years or so at Heartland, was the director of music over the whole entire church, and it was a pretty large church at that time. And so for me, it was just like this place of, once I was in the seat on the bus, it was just like, this is it, and we can drive this all the way to heaven, because this is good. I'm here. We met my wife, had my own place. I don't think any of my brothers in Jamaica really have their own house, have their own cars. I mean, and I had all that stuff, and I had a great job and a great church family, and everything was good. But things shifted again, and I found myself at a place where I was kind of going, okay, God, what am I gonna what am I gonna do? Why is this happening, and how does this even make any sense as to the plans that you have for me? But in the midst of all of that, my grandma's words, God will never teach you to swim to let you drown, stayed with me. And God was carving out a path according to the plans that he already had for my story. Because I have this passion, I have this desire to tell of the miracles that God has done in me. Because the most frequently asked question of me back in the day was, why do you sing with such passion the way you do? Why do you worship the way you do? Why do you draw people in, with such a depth? And it's all about the fact that God is not just an idea to me. God is not just a figment of my imagination or a character in a story. He is more than real. And he has been the one that has set me on this place of purpose and given me this understanding of what hope really looks like when you think you are at your lowest, and when you think nothing will ever amount because of your circumstances. There is always a way, and it never looks the way you planned it, but man, it sure is better than you could ever plan. All right. And so knowing that now I have this opportunity to go tell, to put the story, the miracles, the journey that I've come from, blind to sight, homeless to a home, hopeless to hope, put that down in book form, and then, start writing music and telling God's story through my music and answering the question that people would frequently ask, why do you worship the way you do? By telling. So started Lennox Barnett Ministries, and you were a huge part and huge ally and cheerleader in that process. And we, started and, ministered and partnered with churches and shared and doing summer camps and retreats and all of that stuff. But in the meanwhile, as that was happening, we thought that probably was going to be what was the next phase, or the thing that was, the career or the next journey for me for the rest of my life. That'd be maybe like a Chris Tomlin or something like that. I would go around the churches and get bigger and better at it. And, we were laying out all the marketing strategies and all the plans that would make that a reality. But in the meantime, though, God was still up to something new and different. He was using that moment as a catalyst to where I am now.
So there's an interesting piece, and I remember that time period, that we would meet in different times, and because the temptation is to try to recreate what we just left.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I think these are some of the things that the Hebrews struggled with when they left Egypt after 500 years of enslavement, is that they wanted their comfort to be what they came from.
Yes.
And so sometimes we try to do what was familiar, and that would have been being a worship leader, and now it would just be guest worship leading, right? And go to all these different churches.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what that was like in the midst of that darkness. And Joseph Campbell talks in the dark night of our soul, when change is a mist, and we're being shaped and changed. What was that like, where you were getting some light, but it wasn't exactly the path yet? Yeah.
So it was an interesting time, because as I was journeying through that, I was determined. There's a couple of things that was going on in that process. I was determined to say, I know I've got this gift. I know that there's a need for it. And I know that I want to be something better than I used to be. And so I was fighting to do everything I could to make that dream happen. And I know that God was in it. I wasn't doing it on my own apart from Him. I know I was doing it for Him and with Him. But I thought it was going to be where I was going to just take off and soar. And that was going to be my footprint on the planet. Blind guy to sight, orphan to home, hopeless to hope guy, Lennox Barnett from Lennox Barnett Ministries. But that was not it. That was a catalyst. I still lead worship. I just did a conference last weekend for Youth for Christ. I led worship up there. And in 2 weeks before I head off to the mission field, I'll be in California, doing another conference for leading worship. So I still do that. I still do summer camps. But that's not my main focus. That's not my main drive. I don't have a booking agent, and I'm not looking for bookings. I'm looking for the next mission field where the next group of orphans are that need to hear that there's hope for them. So jump into that. Tell us about that, because that's what you're doing now. And that's what I'm doing now. So as I was in this process of, bookings and engaging with camps and leading worship, we ran into this guy down in Florida who runs a missions organization called Habit Missions out of Charlotte, North Carolina, but they minister in Belize. He invited myself and my videographer, ministry partner Trevor, to head down to Belize, and we headed down there. 2017, I think, and got down there, got on the ground, started ministering, and never felt more alive in that 7-day span of service. As I shared with youth workers and youth at the youth rallies, at a feeding program for kids, for orphans, I felt like God was saying, hey man, like, I created you for this. Think of your story. Think of what you went through from blind all the way up until now. Like the footprints and the footsteps you have taken over those years. These kids, these people are walking that very same path. And now you can encourage them to say, I am a God of hope because of what I've done in you. And who better to tell that story than somebody who's walked their path, who's walked in the shoes that they're walking. And so came back from that, and I remember sitting in a board meeting with you and the others and said, hey, I don't know, but something is stirring here. And man, the thing was, well, wait a second, though. We are contracted. We're contracting with all these different churches, and there's resources and income coming in that's going to feed your family and that. If you go to this side of the equation, it's going to be fundraising, and you're going to be a missionary. And we weighed it, and we counted the cost, and we prayed about it, and unanimously we all said, looks like that's where God's going to be pushing us and leading us, and took that step. And now I'm a full-time missionary, stepped out of contracting with churches full-time, and focusing all my attention on fundraising and reaching and building relationships with missions organizations all over the world when it comes to the orphan, and the fact that they need to know that there's a story that's being written for their lives. So now I travel. Been to about 5 different countries in the last year and a half, multiple times, because we try to build a relationship and go back every single time, and have reached over 1,000 kids. Year to date, we've partnered with this ministry called Bibles for Kids that provide these action Bibles. So we've been able to distribute over 600 of those, hand deliver them to kids, and then about probably 100 to 150 kids have made first-time decisions to kind of place their trust in Jesus Christ. We primarily minister to the orphan, because I was an orphan myself, and one of the many setbacks for me was, does anybody notice me? Does anybody know my name? Then the other question I would ask as an orphan is, who am I going to be? What am I gonna become? Right. Where's my place in this world? Who do I belong to? And you see, all those questions I asked, God answered them. He says, hey, I'm a father to the fatherless. He says, hey, I have a plan for you. I've given you gifts, and I've given you a talent, and I've given you a hope, and I have a future design, custom design, because of the story I've been writing from day one for you to live out and live in. And I believe this to be true for every other orphan, every created being there is, because Hebrews tells us, actually, I'm not Hebrews, but Ephesians tells us that we were created to do good works that God had planned long ago for us to do. Every single one of us. So that means we're wired to do that. But orphans, like myself, we tend to, because of abuse and because of just living in an institution or in a home without individual care, we tend to live in this world of, well, Nobody knows me, because nobody knows me. I have no cheerleaders. I have no way of receiving encouragement or an attaboy or getting pushed to go, hey, you can do this. And so we struggle with a lack of confidence or self-confidence. We struggle with the fear of the future.
And there's that aspect in even though your story as an orphan was a little bit different, right? Meaning you weren't born into the orphanage,
right,
but it happened after your mom died. And but even with that, your mom was ill quite a bit of your life.
Yes.
So there was really that community on that piece of land that your grandmother had.
Yes.
So there was a lot of that, but there were seeds that were planted for you by your grandmother, right? And there was and people that spoke into you at that time period. So I very much hear that that's part of your message, is that you're trying to speak into individuals that may not have someone speaking into them.
Exactly.
And that God, you're being a vessel for God to work through.
Exactly.
For that.
Yes.
But then there's another part too that you're trying to do, and which is that other piece, because a lot of individuals that go and do the mission work may attempt to do that. Maybe they don't have your story, but they attempt to do that. But you've also saw that there's something that happens that when an orphan who's grown up in the orphanage, in the institution, turns 18, especially in these third world countries, there is no game over, right? It stops. The resources stop.
Yes.
And so another part of what you're also doing, expanding the ministry, is to help those individuals from 18 and on. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I have a strong passion for the 18-year-old orphan in a third world country. Most third world countries, an orphan turns 18. And if I back up a little bit, in orphans generally in an under-resourced country, if they make it into the system, right, they are just maintained. They try to give them like the basic needs, or they try to meet their basic needs like food and, minimal health care if they can, keeping them alive and sending them to school. And we all know, we're both parents, that it takes a lot more than that, and it takes a village, that our kids need to be nurtured and cared for. So then when they grow up, they become highly effective contributors to society, because they were encouraged and you built into them. That doesn't happen in orphanages. And so when an orphan grows up with all these questions of self-doubt and fear of the future and what's going to happen to me when when they turn 18 and they let them out the doors, that becomes a reality. And so for me, at one point, if I wasn't here in the United States, I would have been one of them. And of course, truth be told, when the family wanted me to find another family, the other option was, hey, you can also go back to Jamaica. And the question I was asking myself is, what would I do there? What would I have done? Who would I be? Where would I go? And so one of my heart's desire is for those 18-year-olds, now that they're aging out of the system, how can we come alongside them and encourage them and create kind of a bridge home and a program that they can actually live somewhere, learn how to become independent, learn how to develop some self-esteem, self-worth, and pride and dignity in who they are. And I think that begins with them discovering that they are huge contributors to society, because they were created on purpose for a purpose. They're gifted, they have talent, and they can do and they can become. And so one of the things that we want to do, and that I want to do as we grow into this, is figure out what that looks like in third world countries, and how we can meet that need by creating this environment, this safe place where we encourage, equip, and release these orphans to become highly effective contributors to society, finding what, kind of creates in them a sense of purpose, whether they can sing, whether they're musicians, whether they're artists, whether they are mechanics, whether they want to farm. What is a good trade or something that they can hone into and go, this is my contribution, this is my possibility to making a difference in my country, in my environment, in my society.
So the idea, we're not only playing the hope in that they have a story themselves, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also then helping them take that and build on it.
Yes.
Like numerous people started doing with you regarding the singing, regarding the music, and then even as you were recreating your story from working for an institution that had all the security and all the benefits and all the things that you're supposed to have to this aspect of being an entrepreneur, and now as you had to recreate yourself with that, you're now taking that message to these third world countries, to these places where they don't have the same resources. But and I think that's why I think it's so important, because without a doubt, we can have all the resources in the world, have access to everything, but if we don't have hope, we're not going to utilize them.
Exactly.
And we see that all the time here, where we have tons of things accessible to us.
Yes.
So that is critical. It's critical to speak into these individuals or into individuals. But then it needs to be more. There needs to be steps of bridge. How do we take that seed that's been planted in this awakening, right, to what that call may be? How do we actually start having that flourish, similar to like when you were blind, and then you could see. There was a transition period when your brain had to start coming in sync with this new gift that you had. It didn't feel like a gift at first, I imagine. It was almost like a burden. Like you were able to move around easier before, but you continue to work it. Similar when you were making this transition away from working for one particular church or institution. And as you transitioned, it wasn't easy. But you had to be persistent and had to feel that, trust that feeling inside, trust that nudging inside that God was pointing you into a different direction, a bigger direction, even though it seemed way out of reach. Doesn't mean it's not attainable.
Exactly.
We talk about this idea of having big goals. I had Dalton and Kylie on a couple weeks ago, and we talked about this idea of having big goals and striving after big goals versus safe goals. And in that space of having those big goals, there's a vulnerability, but it's also where greatness can come from. So
and that's where I'm at in this next chapter, is to say, so I've done the kind of went through that falling upwards experience, right? And I kind of found my stride, but I don't want to remain just comfortable in that. I want to kind of broaden my stride and make bigger footprints, big enough so that people, orphans can see and kind of go, okay, there is a way. I can walk in this. I can walk in this. And so for me, the next step is to figure out this next journey and how it is that we can build these houses and provide this program with volunteers and resources and support that would, take these 18-year-olds and put them in an environment where they can thrive, where they can develop their gifts, develop their sense of purpose, and develop their sense of calling, and then release them in that country. Now, for me, I was taken out of Jamaica, and I don't think we should try to take and adopt every single orphan. I think, Haiti needs brilliant shoemakers. Haiti needs brilliant, building engineers or maintenance guys. Haiti needs brilliant doctors. Haiti, and orphans are just as capable and able because they were created by the same God, who does not make mistakes and does not shorthand or cut corners. He just makes us on purpose for a specific purpose. And if I can do anything in this world, I want to give my best shot to this opportunity to help an 18-year-old orphan discover that they were created for a purpose, and that they were created to thrive, and they were created to ripple and make a difference and contribute to that society in which they were born. I got to do it. Yeah. And I'm not smart, but I know this, like you just said, bigger goals. And I'm aiming, and I'm working hard as it depends on me, but I'm praying as hard as like it depends on God.
Yeah. Well, I think, and we've had this conversation numerous times over the years, praying, to be vulnerable enough to recognize that I need to do this in collaboration with God.
With God.
And I need to quiet myself, which is usually my ideas, my thoughts, my fears, so that I can see the direction that He's pointing me in. Because sometimes it's different than the direction that I'm thinking I need to go in. So, Lennox, as we're wrapping up today, and I so appreciate you being able to share that story, that idea that I was blind and now I can see. There's a literal aspect of that to your story. There's a metaphorical part of that to our story. We all can fall victim to being blind, even though we can see colors and shapes and all that.
True.
And it could be because of something that's happened to us, or maybe something that didn't happen. Maybe it's because of how I think it's supposed to be versus being open to the possibility of what could be. I so appreciate you not only being here today.
Thank you.
If there was something that you could one thing you could leave for the people that are listening, what would be that one thing that you'd want them to know?
I'd say the one thing is this, man. Like, I hope it doesn't sound cliche, but man, we were all created with a story in mind. That there's a journey that we're on, and it's a story. And our paths may all look different, and our backgrounds and the obstacles that we're overcoming and going through look different, but it doesn't make it any better or any less. That we were designed on purpose for a purpose. And one can live, but you will truly live when you recognize, hey, here's my footprint. Here's my purpose. And you embrace it, and you go after it, and you share it, and engage and invite people in the journey along the way.
Lennox, thank you very much. What's if someone wanted to get a hold of you, or someone wanted to support your ministry, what's the easiest way for them to either get in contact with you or support the ministry, or just maybe ask you questions about it? What's the easiest way for them to get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way for them to get a hold of us is just jump on our website. It's LennoxBarnettMinistries.org.
Okay.
Or they can follow us on Lennox Barnett Ministries Facebook or Lennox Barnett Ministries Instagram. But the easiest way is to jump on LennoxBarnettMinistries.org, and you can leave me a note or contact us. You can support our ministry, and you can actually follow where we've been, what we're up to, and where we're headed.
Perfect.
So
Perfect. Well, Lennox, once again, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your story and sharing some of your insights and some of your experiences. As always, I always learn tons of stuff, and always inspired when we meet. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you very much for being with us today. As Lennox shared about his story and his journey on that story, that yes, it was extremely powerful, the first part of his story, and dramatic, from going from being born blind and then being able to see and what that was like. But then also that the story didn't finish there, and that even as he continued his life, there's that aspect in which we need to continue recreating ourselves. So thank you very much for being with us today. I look forward to being with you again next week.